The Night of Milky Way Train. Kenji Miyazawa. 1. The afternoon class. Ben, you said it was a river or milk, but do you know what this long white thing really is? There was a large black map of stars hanging on the blackboard. The teacher pointed to the white part of the map and asked everyone. Campanella raised his hand. Then 4 or 5 boys raised their hands, too. Giovanni also tried to raise his hand, but he stopped halfway through. He once read in a magazine that all the white things were stars. But lately, Giovanni felt sleepy almost every day, and he had no time for reading. In fact, he didn't have any books to read. So he felt like he didn't understand anything. But the teacher noticed him. Giovanni. You know, don't you? Giovanni stood up at once. But when he stood up, he couldn't answer it clearly. Zanelli looked back from the front seat. And when he saw Giovanni, he grinned. Giovanni's face turned red. The teacher said again. If you look at the Milky River with a big telescope, what will you see? Giovanni thought it was stars. But he still couldn't answer it. The teacher seemed to be at a loss for a while. But this time he looked to Campanella. What do you think, Campanella? Campanella had raised his hand so well, but he couldn't answer either. The teacher was surprised. He was watching Campanella for a while. However, the teacher pointed to the star map, saying, well, okay. If you look at this white Milky River with a big good telescope, you can see many little stars. Won't you, Giovanni? Giovanni turned red and nodded. Giovanni's eyes were full of tears. He thought, yes, I knew that. Of course Campanella knew it as well. It was in the magazine. Campanella and I read it together at his house. His father is a doctor. After reading the magazine, Campanella brought a big book from his father's room and opened the page about the Milky Way. We saw beautiful pictures with white dots all over the black pages for a long time. Campanella hasn't forgotten that at all. So why didn't he answer? Maybe it's because he felt sorry for me. These days, I have been working hard every morning and late afternoon. Even when I go to school, I don't play with the others. And I don't talk with Campanella. He felt sorry for me, so he didn't answer. I feel sorry, both of us. The teacher said again. So, if you think this really is a river, each little star is a grain of sand in that river, and if you think it is a big stream of milk, it's more like the Milky River. Each star is a ball of fat floating in the milk, and what is the water of the river? The answer is a kind empty space where light moves. The sun and the earth are also floating in it. That means we are living in the water of the Milky Way. And if we looked around from inside that water, the stars would seem to be gathered closer together at the bottom. That's why it looks white and not very clear. Now look at this model. The teacher pointed to a big double lens. There were many shiny grains of sand in it. The shape of the Milky Way is just like this. These growing grains are all shining stars, like our sun. Our sun is almost at the center here. The Earth is very close to it. Now, imagine you are standing in the middle of this at night. Look around the inside of the lens. This part of the lens is thinner, so you can see only a few shining stars. But these parts of the lens are thick, so you can see a lot of shining stars. The ones in the distance look white and they're not clear. That is what people think about the Milky Way today. Well, time's up. Next lesson, I'll explain how big this lens is and about the various stars inside it. As you know, today is the Star Festival. So please go outside tonight and look at the sky. The class is over. Put your books and notebooks away. And the classroom was filled with the sounds of noise. The desks were opened and closed. Books were put in piles. Then everyone stood up. They bowed to the teacher and left the classroom. Second, printing company. Giovanni went outside. 7 or 8 boys in the same class gathered at the cherry tree in the schoolyard without going home. Campanella was in the middle of it. They were talking about going to get some cucumbers. They needed some cucumbers to make blue lights. They were going to bring the lights to the Star Festival and would float them on the river tonight. Giovanni left school in a hurry, swinging his arms high. In the houses of the town, the balls of leaves were hung and lights were put on the pine branches. All the people were preparing for the Star Festival tonight. Without returning home, Giovanni turned 3 corners and entered a big printing company. There was a man in a white shirt at the entrance. Giovanni bowed, took off his shoes, and went in. He opened a big door. It was still daytime, but the lights were on inside the room, and many press machines were working loudly. There were a lot of workers. They were wearing shades over their eyes or had cloths tied around their heads. They were all reading and counting something just as though they were singing. Giovanni went up the man sitting at the 3rd high table from the entrance. He bowed. The man searched for a shelf for a while and then, "Can you pick out this many?" he said, giving Giovanni a piece of paper. Giovanni took out a small box from the foot of the table. He went over to a corner where the lights were very bright and crouched down. And he started picking out pieces of printing type with a small pair of tweezers. Each one was the size of a grain of rice. A man with a blue apron walked past behind Giovanni. "Hi, Mr. Magnifying Glass, good morning," he said. 4 or 5 men nearby laughed. They didn't turn to look at him. Giovanni carefully picked out the pieces of type. He rubbed his eyes many times. Sometime after the clock struck 6, Giovanni had filled the box with the type. He checked it again, looking at the pieces of paper in his hand. Then he took the box back to the man at the high table. The man silently received it and nodded. Giovanni bowed. He opened the door and went to the desk at the entrance. The man wearing the white shirt silently gave a small silver coin to Giovanni. Giovanni looked a little better. He bowed deeply and jumped out with a bag under the table. He whistled cheerfully and dropped by the bakery. He bought some bread and a bag of sugar cubes. Then he started running as fast as his legs would carry him. 3. Home. Giovanni came back home cheerfully. He lived in a small house in the back town. There were 3 entrances lined up there, and there was an empty box on the left door. Purple cabbage and asparagus were planted in the box. The sunshades were down on the 2 small windows. Mom, I'm back now. How are you feeling? Giovanni asked while taking off his shoes. Oh, Giovanni, you had hard work, so you must be tired. It was cool today. I've been feeling better. Giovanni entered the front door. Giovanni's mother was resting in the room next to the entrance. There was a white cloth over her body. Giovanni opened the window. Mom, I bought sugar cubes today. I thought you could have some in your milk. Oh, you should eat something first. I don't feel like having anything yet. Mom, when did sister go home? Around 3 o'clock. She did a lot of housework. Hasn't your milk come yet? I don't think so. I'll go and get it then. Oh, I can wait. Have your dinner first. Your sister made something using tomatoes and left it there. Okay, I'll have it now. Giovanni took a plate of tomatoes from the window. He ate it with some bread for a while. Hey, Mom. I'm sure Dad will be back soon. Oh, I think so, too. But why do you think so? Because this morning's newspaper said that the fishing in the north was very good this year. Oh, but your father may not be on a fishing boat. I'm sure he is. I don't believe he did anything bad and went to prison. The other day, he brought a lot of things to school, like big crab shells and reindeer horns. They are still in the science room. The teachers always take them to the classroom in the 6th grade. Your father said he would bring you a sea otter jacket next time. Everyone says it suits me. They say it as if they're making fun of me. Do they say bad things to you? Yes, but not Campanella. He never says anything like that. When the other boys say bad things, Campanella looks sorry for me. His father and your father had been close friends since they were small like you. Oh, that's why Dad took me to Campanella's house. I'm glad I was back then. On my way home from school, I often dropped by Campanella's house. He had a toy train which ran on alcohol. There were 7 pieces of rail, and if you put them together it made a circle. It also had telegraph poles and signals. The signal lights turned green only when the train passed. One day, we ran out of the alcohol. When we used oil instead, the train turned completely black. Did it really? I still go to deliver the newspaper every morning, but the house is always quiet. Because it's early morning. They have a dog called Zal. His tail is like a brush. When I go there, he always follows me as far as the corner of the town. Sometimes even further. Tonight, they're all going to float cucumber lanterns on the river. I'm sure the dog will follow them. Oh, yes. It's the Star Festival tonight. Yeah. I'll go and see it while taking milk. All right. But, don't go into the river. No. I'll only see it from the bank. I'll be back in an hour. You can spend longer if you like. I won't worry if you're with Campanella. Oh, I'm sure we're together. Mom, shall I close the window for you? Oh, please. It's getting cooler. Giovanni stood up and closed the window. He put away his plates and the bag of bread. Then he put on his shoes in a lively way. I'll be back in an hour and a half, he said. He went out through the dark doorway. The night of the Centaur Festival. Giovanni was whistling sadly. He went down the hill of the town. There were dark trees on both sides. Under the hill, one big street lamp stood shining brightly. Giovanni went down to the lamp. Giovanni's shadow had been behind him, long and dark like a monster. But as he walked towards the lamp, the shadow got darker and clearer. Then it lifted its feet and waved its hands, and moved round to his side. I'm a great locomotive, thought Giovanni. This is a hill, so I speed up. Now, I'm passing the street lamp. Well, now my shadow is like a compass. It's gone all the way round, and came to the front. Giovanni passed under the street lamp. Suddenly Zanelli came out from the dark street behind the lamp. He was wearing a new shirt with a sharp-pointed collar. He passed Giovanni. Zanelli, are you going to see the lanterns on the river? Before Giovanni said so, Giovanni, your dad is bringing you a sea otter jacket. Zanelli shouted back. Giovanni's heart suddenly felt cold. The air around him seemed to be screaming. What did you say, Zanelli? Giovanni shouted back loudly. But Zanelli had already gone inside the house across the road. Why does Zanelli say things like that to me, thought Giovanni. I haven't done anything wrong to him. He looks like a mouse when he runs. The reason he says things like that is that he is stupid. Giovanni walked through the town, thinking about various things. The town was beautifully decorated with various lights and branches. A bright light was on in the window of the clock shop. Giovanni stopped to look. There was an owl with red stone eyes that turned round every second. There was also a thick glass disc. Its color was like the sea. Various jewels were placed on it. As the disc slowly turned, they looked just like stars. The figure of a centaur slowly appeared from the back. In the middle of the disc was a round black map of stars decorated with green asparagus leaves. Giovanni stared at it, forgetting everything. It was much smaller than the one he saw at school today. But with this one you could fix the day and time. Then the sky would appear just as it really was. So today the Milky Way was right at the center. It was like a white belt going from top to bottom. At the bottom there was steam rising. Behind the disk there was a small three-legged telescope. It was shining yellow. And hanging on the wall at the back of the shop there was a big map of the stars. They were all in the shape of things like mysterious beasts, snakes, fish, and water pots. Giovanni stood there for a while, There were really such a scorpion and warriors in the sky. Oh, I wanted to walk through them forever, he thought. Suddenly, he remembered his mother's milk and walked away from the shop. His jacket was too tight across his shoulders, but he kept his head high. He went through the town swinging his arms high. The air was clear. It flowed through the streets and between shops like water. All the street lamps were wrapped with dark green branches. The 6 platanus trees in front of the electric company were covered in little lights. It looked like the city of mermaids. The children were all wearing brand new clothes. They were whistling the Star Traveler's song as they ran around, and they were letting off blue fireworks. They shouted, playing happily, "Centaurus, send the dude down on us." Giovanni rushed to the milk shop. His head was hanging down again. His mind was on very different things from all the things going on around him. Giovanni came to the place where many tall trees reached high up into the starry sky. He entered a dark gate of the milk shop. He stood in front of a dark kitchen. There was a smell of cows. He took off his cap and said, "Good evening." But there didn't seem to be anyone in the house. "Good evening." "Excuse me." Giovanni stood straight and shouted again. Then, after a while, an old woman appeared. She was walking very slowly and looked ill. "What do you want?" she asked in a low voice. "Well, the milk didn't come to our house today, so I've come to get it," Giovanni replied brightly. "I don't know because there's nobody here now," said the woman as she looked down at Giovanni. "Please come back tomorrow." She rubbed under her red eyes. "But my mother is sick," replied Giovanni. "We'll be in trouble if we don't get the milk tonight." "Then please come back later," said the woman as she turned to go. "All right. Thank you," said Giovanni. He bowed and came out of the kitchen. He went back towards the crossroads in town. Then he saw some black shadows and white shirts in front of a shop on the road to the bridge. 6 or 7 boys were walking along whistling and laughing. Each one was holding a blue light lantern. Giovanni knew those laughs and whistles very well. They were his classmates. Giovanni tried to return, but he then changed his mind. He walked towards them in an energetic way. He tried to say, "Are you going to the river?" But the words wouldn't come out. He felt a little choked. "Giovanni, a sea otter jacket is coming," shouted Zanelli. "Giovanni, a sea otter jacket is coming," shouted all others. Giovanni turned red and tried to walk past them in a hurry. He didn't really know whether he was walking or not. At that time, he noticed the tall figure of Campanella. Campanella felt sorry for him and smiled kindly a little. He was looking at Giovanni as if he was wondering whether he would get angry. Giovanni walked to escape. Shortly after the boys passed by, they started whistling again. As Giovanni turned the corner, he looked back. Zanelli had also turned back to look at him. And Campanella also whistled high and walked off towards the bridge. It could just be seen in the distance. Giovanni somehow felt very lonely. He suddenly started running. He put his hand on his ear and shouted, "Ah!" Some little children jumping up and down shouted, "Wow!" They thought Giovanni was excited. Giovanni hurried toward the dark hill. Five, the pillar on the hill. Beyond the fields there was a gentle hill. It was very dark tonight, and its flat top looked lower than usual. There was the Great Bear in the sky. Giovanni went up the path through the small woods. There was already a dew. On both sides there were bushes of various shapes and long grass. The path ran through them in a straight line, white in the light from the stars. In the grass, there were small insects that gave off a shiny blue light. Some leaves were transparent in the light. Giovanni thought that they looked like the lanterns his classmates had been carrying. As Giovanni passed out of the black pine and oak forests, the sky suddenly opened up before him. He could see the white Milky Way. It went all the way from the south to the north. He could also see the pillar at the top of the hill. There were wild flowers all over the place as if they came from a dream world to spread their scent. A bird cried out as it flew over the hill. Giovanni came under the pillar at the top. He threw himself down on the cold grass. The lights of the town were shining in the darkness. They looked like something deep down at the bottom of the sea. Giovanni could just hear the children singing and whistling and shouting. The wind was crying in the distance, and the grass on the hill was rustling quietly. Giovanni's shirt was wet with sweat, and he began to feel cold. He looked out across the dark fields beyond the edge of the town. Suddenly Giovanni heard the sound of a train. He stared out into the darkness. He could just make out a line of the little red lights in the train windows. Ah, there are many travelers in the train, he thought. They will be eating apples and laughing and having fun. Giovanni started feeling very sad. His eyes went up to the sky again. So they say that white belt in the sky is made of stars. He kept staring at the sky. His teacher had said it was a cold and empty place. But he couldn't believe that. On the contrary, the more he looked, the more he thought it must be full of fields and woods. The blue Lyra constellation seemed to divide into 3 or 4. It twinkled and its legs moved in and out many times. In the end it turned into something like a long mushroom. He thought that the town below now looked like a group of many distant stars or a great cloud of smoke. Six, Milky Way Station. After that, Giovanni noticed the pillar just behind him had changed. It was now in the shape of a triangular signpost. It flickered on and off like a firefly for a while. It seemed to be moving and slowly became clearer. Finally, it stopped moving. It stood straight in the field. The sky was like a plate of new blue steel. Then, somewhere, Giovanni heard a strange voice. Milky Way Station. Milky Way Station. Then, suddenly, everything went very bright. It was as if the lights of millions of firefly squid had been thrown across the sky. Or at a diamond company, someone suddenly turned over the hidden diamonds and scattered them. As the light became so brighter, Giovanni rubbed his eyes. Giovanni found himself sitting in the car of a little night train. He was able to hear the sound of the train. He was looking out of the window. The car was almost empty. It was lit by small yellow lights, and the seats were covered in blue cloth. Two big brass buttons were shining on the gray wall over there. Giovanni noticed there was a tall boy in the seat in front of him. He was wearing a black jacket that seemed to be wet. He was looking out of the window with his head out. Giovanni felt like he had seen the boy's shoulders. He really wanted to know who he was. When Giovanni tried to put his head out through the window, the boy pulled his head in. He looked at Giovanni. It was the Campanella. Giovanni was about to say, "Campanella, have you been here for a while?" But Campanella spoke first. Everyone ran a lot, but they missed this train. Zanelli also ran a lot, but couldn't catch this. "Ah, yes," thought Giovanni. "We all went out together. Shall we wait for them somewhere?" he said out loud. "Zanelli has gone home," Campanella answered. "His father came for him." Campanella said so, but he looked very pale, as if he was in pain. Giovanni had a strange feeling that he had forgotten something somewhere. "He has. Shut up now." However, Campanella suddenly seemed to get well. He looked out through the window again and said cheerfully, "Oh, I've forgotten my water bottle and my sketchbook," he said. "But it's okay. We'll soon be at Swan Station. I really like watching swans. Even if they're flying over beyond the river, I'm sure we can see them." Campanella was holding a map in the shape of a round, black board. He kept turning it round. Right in the middle was the Milky Way. A railroad line ran south along its left bank of the Milky Way. The map was really good. The stations, triangular signposts, fountains and forests were shown by beautiful lights, blue and orange and green. Giovanni thought that he had seen the map somewhere before. "Where did you buy that map?" asked Giovanni. "It's made from obsidian, isn't it?" "I got it at the Milky Way station," replied Campanella. "Didn't you get one?" "No. I'm not sure I passed through Milky Way station." "We are here right now, right?" Giovanni pointed just to the north of the sign of Swan Station. "Yes." "Oh, is that the moonlight shining on the dry riverbank?" Campanella pointed out of the window. Giovanni looked. The silver grass of the sky was moving like waves all over the riverbank. It was rustling in the wind. "No, it's not moonlight," Giovanni replied. "It's shining because it's the Milky Way." He felt so happy that he wanted to jump up and down. He stamped his feet on the floor. Then he put his head out through the window. He whistled Star Traveler's song and pulled himself up higher, hoping to see the water of the Milky Way. But it wasn't very clear. However, he could see that the beautiful water was more transparent than glass. It was flowing along fast and silent. Sometimes there seemed to be fine purple waves, and the water shone like a rainbow. Giovanni noticed there were triangular signposts all over the fields. Beautiful phosphorescent light came from them. Those further away looked smaller. They were very clear and orange and yellow. Those that were closer looked bigger. They were pale and not so clear. The light shone all over the fields. Some were triangular and some were square, others were in the shape of chains. Giovanni was very excited. He shook his head many times. The beautiful, shining blue and orange signposts flickered and shook as if they were alive. "I think I've reached the plain of heaven," cried Giovanni. "I don't think this train is running on coal." He stuck his left hand out of the window and looked towards the front. "No, I guess it runs on alcohol or electricity," replied Campanella. The beautiful small train went on further and further through the silver grass of the sky, beside the water of the Milky Way, and past the faint blue light of the triangular signposts. "Oh, the gentian flowers are in bloom," said Campanella, pointing outside. "It's already autumn." There were lovely purple gentian flowers in the short grass beside the tracks. They looked as if they were carved out of moonstone. "Shall I jump out to collect some and then jump back on the train?" cried Giovanni. He was so excited. "It's too late. They've already gone so far behind us." Before Campanella said so, they went past more gentian flowers. They were all shining brightly. And then more. Gentians like wine glasses, with yellow bottoms. Gentians like fountains. Gentians like rain. And rows of shining triangular signposts in the fields, some not very clear, some burning bright. (7) The Northern Cross and the Priacine Coast. "Will my mother forgive me?" suddenly Campanella said, as if he had taken the plunge. He had a slight stammer. Giovanni stayed silent. Ah, yes, he was thinking. My mother is around that orange triangular signpost that looks like a distant dust, and now she is thinking about me. Campanella said, "I'd do anything for my mother if it would make my mother happy. But what makes her really happy?" He looked as if he was trying not to cry. "Nothing bad has happened to your mom, has it?" Giovanni cried out in surprise. "I don't know," replied Campanella. "Anyway, whoever it is, if you do really good things, they'll be really happy. So I think my mom will forgive me." He looked as if he had decided to do something. Suddenly the inside of the car was filled with bright white light. The riverbed of the Milky Way was gleaming like diamonds or drops of dew on the grass. The water ran on silent and with no shape. In the middle of the stream, they saw an island. There was a pale light around it. On the flat top of the island, there was a great shining white cross. It had a clear gold halo around it. It stood quietly as if it was made from frozen Arctic clouds. "Hallelujah! Hallelujah!" Voices arose all around Giovanni and Campanella. They looked round. There were travelers in the car. All of them had their hands together. They were praying facing the cross. Their clothes were neat and they were all holding a black book to their chests. They were wearing crystal beads around their necks too. Without thinking, the two boys stood up straight. Campanella's cheeks looked beautiful and shining like ripe apples. Then the island and the cross gradually moved to the back. The other side of the river shone with a pale light. The pampas grass was blowing in the wind, and gentians kept appearing and disappearing in the grass. They looked like gentle fire. For a short while, the view was blocked by thick pampas grass. Swan Island could just be seen a couple of times. But it soon became something small and far away. It now looked like a painting. Then the pampas grass rustled close to the train again, and the island disappeared from sight. Giovanni suddenly noticed a tall woman behind him. She was dressed in black and looked like a Catholic nun. He hadn't noticed her come into the car. She had green eyes and stared down at the floor. She still seemed to be listening to some words or voices coming from the island. The other travelers went quietly back to their seats. Giovanni and Campanella both felt somehow different from usual. There was a new feeling like sadness filling their hearts. They talked together softly. "We'll soon be arriving at Swan Station, won't we?" "Yes, at 11 o'clock. A green signal light and a white pole passed by the outside of the window. Then the lights in front of the points passed below the window. The train was getting slower. Soon, a beautiful row of lights on the platform appeared. They seemed to get bigger and bigger as the train slowed down. Their car stopped right in front of the big clock at Swan Station. The face of the clock looked very bright in the fresh autumn air. Its two blue steel hands pointed at 11 o'clock. Everyone got off at once. Now the car was empty. A notice below the clock said 20-minute stop. "Shall we get off as well?" asked Giovanni. "Why not?" The two boys jumped up together and jumped out of the door. They ran to the ticket gate. There was a bright purple light. There was no sign of anybody, not even the station master. The two went out to a small square in front of the station. It was surrounded by trees that looked like cut glass. There was a wide white road. It headed straight into the blue light of the Milky Way. All the other travelers had disappeared. Giovanni and Campanella started walking along the white road shoulder to shoulder. Their shadows spread in all directions like the spokes of two wheels. They soon came to the beautiful riverbank that they had seen from the train. Campanella picked up some of the beautiful sand. He dropped it in his palm. He spread the sand with his fingers and talked as if he were dreaming. "Look, this sand is all crystals. A little flame is burning inside each one." "That's right," Giovanni replied. But he was wondering where he had learned that. The stones on the riverbed were all transparent. Some were rock crystal. Some were topaz. Some had cracks in them. Some were corundum with a pale, misty light coming from their edges. Giovanni ran across the beach and put his hands in the water. The mysterious water of the Milky Way was more transparent than glass, but you could tell that it was running. The boys' hands in the water seemed to be floating up a little, and they were the color of mercury. And the ripples against them looked as if they were burning with a beautiful phosphorescence. The boys looked upstream. They could see a cliff covered with pampas grass. Below it there was a flat, white rock just like a playground. They could also see the silhouettes of 5 or 6 people bending down and then standing up again as if they were digging. Some tools shone in the light every now and then. "Let's go," The boys shouted at the same time and ran towards the rock. At the edge, there was a signpost made of china. It said Pliocene Beach. There were iron railings here and there and some lovely wooden benches. Campanella stopped and picked up something black. Look here. What's this strange thing? It looked like a long, pointed nut. It's a walnut, replied Giovanni. Oh, there are lots of them. I don't think the river washed them here. They must be from inside the rock. They're very big, aren't they? Double the size of usual walnuts. I'm sure they're digging something up over there. Let's go and see. Still holding the walnuts, the boys went towards the people. On their left, the waves seemed to be on fire. On their right, the silver heads of the pampas grass rustled all over the cliff. They could see a tall man who looked like a professor. He was wearing big boots and glasses with very thick lenses. There were 3 assistants. They were busily writing something in a notebook, using pickaxes and spades. The professor was giving orders to 3 assistants. Be careful, he shouted. Use a spade. A spade. Oh no, dig a little further. No, no. Why are you so rough? Giovanni and Campanella looked closely. They could see the bones of a very big animal in the soft white rock. It looked as if it had fallen and broken into pieces. Then they saw about 10 square, carefully cut pieces of rock. Each rock had a number on it and 2 hoof prints. The professor turned towards the boys and his glasses gleamed. Have you come to watch us? He asked. Ah, you found some walnuts. Well, they're from about 1.2 million years ago. They're quite new ones, in fact. This was beside the sea, you see, after the Tertiary period. That was 1.2 million years ago. You can find seashells under here, where the river is now used to be salt water. This animal you can see here is a boss. Hey, you! Don't use a pickaxe there. Carefully do it with chisel. Where was I? Ah, yes, it's a boss. It's the ancestor of today's cows. There were many of them around in the past. What are you going to do with it? Ah, well, we need these bones to prove something. You see, we believe this rock here is 1.2 million years old. But the thing is whether other people will look at it the way we do. They may think this is just wind and water and empty sky. Do you get the idea? You see, but... Hey you! Don't use a spade there, either. The ribs of the boss are probably right under there. The professor ran off towards his assistants. It's time, let's go, said Campanella, looking at his map and his watch. Giovanni bowed to the professor. I'm sorry, but we must be going now. Oh, really? Well, goodbye then. The professor started, walking around again giving orders to his assistants. The 2 boys didn't want to miss the train. They ran like the wind across the white rock. And in fact, they found they really could run like the wind. They didn't get tired at all, and their feet didn't get hot. Giovanni thought, if I could run like this, I could run all over the world. The light at the station grew bigger. In no time at all, they were back sitting in their seats on the train. They looked out of the window in the direction of the river. Eight. The bird catcher. "May I sit here?" said a man's voice behind them. It sounded quite rough but kind. A man with a red beard and a rather bent back was standing there. He was wearing an old brown coat and carrying a bundle wrapped in white cloth over his shoulder. "Yes, that's fine," said Giovanni. The man smiled in his beard. He slowly put the luggage on the rack. Giovanni felt something very lonely and sad. He was silently looking at the clock in front of them. Then, far ahead, something like a glass whistle blew. The train was already running quietly. Campanella was looking here and there at the ceiling of the car. A black beetle had settled on one of the lights. Its large shadow was cast on the ceiling. The man with the red beard was looking at Giovanni and Campanella with a nostalgic smile on his face. The train was getting faster and faster. Pampa's grass and the river gleamed in turn outside the window. The man with the red beard asked the two of them, "Where are you two heading?" "Oh, well, we're going wherever the train takes us," replied Giovanni, a little embarrassed. "That's good. This train will go on and on forever and ever, you know." "Where are you going?" Campanella asked suddenly. He sounded as though he was looking for a fight. Giovanni couldn't help smiling. Then, the person sitting across from them, wearing a pointed hat and a large key hanging from his belt, looked at them and smiled. Campanella's face turned red and also started smiling. But the man with the red beard didn't look angry, but his cheeks moved as he answered, "Oh, I'll get off right there. I'm in the business of catching birds." "Really? What kind of birds?" "Oh, cranes and wild geese. Snowy herons and swans, too." "Are there many cranes around here?" "Yes. They've been crying for a while." "Haven't you heard them?" "No. You can still hear them crying. Now, listen carefully." The two boys raised their heads and tried to listen as hard as they could. All they could hear was the rumbling sound of the train. Then, from between the pampas grass wind, they could hear the sound of water flowing out somewhere. "How do you catch cranes?" "Do you mean cranes or snowy herons?" "Snowy herons," replied Giovanni, thinking it didn't matter which type of bird it was. "Ah, well, snowy herons are no problem. All the herons are made from the sand of the Milky Way. It sticks together, you see. And they always return to the river. They come down legs first like this. You have to wait for them on the riverbed. Then you grab their legs just before they touch the ground. The herons go hard. They feel safe and they die. Then all you have to do is press them like dried leaves." "Are you going to use a heron as a pressed leaf?" "Is it a specimen?" "It's not a specimen. Everyone wants to eat them." "That sounds strange," said Campanella with a doubtful look on his face. "Nothing strange or doubtful. Look." The man stood up and took the bundle down from the rack. He quickly unwrapped it. "Now look at these." I've just caught them." "Oh, they really are snowy herons," shouted the two boys together. The snowy herons were pure white and shining as the Northern Cross the boys had weaned earlier. The bundle contained the flat bodies of about 10 birds. They were lying with their black legs up against their bodies. "Oh, their eyes are closed," said Campanella. He gently touched one of the closed white eyes with a finger. The herons have crescent-shaped white eyes. The spear-like white hair on their heads was also neat. "Right? Just as I told you," said the bird catcher. He wrapped the birds up again in the cloth and tied the bundle with a piece of string. Who would eat snowy herons around here, thought Giovanni. And he asked, "Do herons taste good?" "Oh, yes. I get orders every day, you know. But wild geese sell better. The shape of a wild goose is far better, you see. And, above all, they're no trouble. Look." The bird catcher unwrapped the other end of his bundle. There were the bodies of some wild geese inside. They were also rather flat, lying with their heads side by side. They had yellow and blue spots and shone like a light. "This is ready to eat. Would you like to try some?" The bird catcher lightly pulled a leg off one of the geese. Then it came off easily, just as if it were made of chocolate. "Go on. Have some." He tore the leg into two and gave them each a piece. Giovanni took a bite and thought, Just as I thought. It is sweet. In fact, it tastes better than chocolate, but is this a wild goose ever flew anywhere? This man must be an owner of a candy store in a field somewhere. Oh, I shouldn't think things like that while I'm eating this man's sweets. He went on eating. "Have some more," said the bird catcher. Giovanni wanted to eat more, but he said, "No, thank you." Then the bird catcher offered some to the man with the key sitting across from them. The man took off his hat. Well, I feel sorry eating something you sell to make a living." "Oh, not at all," replied the bird catcher. "So how are the migratory birds this year?" "Oh, they're fine. But the day before yesterday, around the second period, calls came in from everywhere about the lighthouse light being turned off. Well, we didn't do anything, you know. A flock of black migratory birds flew right in front of the lights. We couldn't do anything, could we?" I said, "Hey, what are you talking about?" "There's nothing I can do. Tell my boss, the one with the thin legs and the long mouth, who wears a coat of feathers." "That's what I said. Ha ha ha." Suddenly there was no more pampas grass outside. The light came in again from across the fields. "Why are snowy herons more trouble?" asked Campanella. He had been thinking about asking him for some time. Well, in order to eat snowy herons, the bird catcher turned towards him. "You have to hang them for 10 days under the light of the water of the Milky Way. Or you can bury them in sand for 3 or 4 days. Then the mercury disappears and the birds can be eaten." "But this isn't a bird. It's just a sweet," said Campanella. He seemed to be thinking the same way as Giovanni. Suddenly the bird catcher stood up. "Oh, I have to get off here," he said. He took down his bundle and disappeared. "Where has he gone?" The two boys looked at each other. The lighthouse keeper tried to stretch himself a little. Then he smiled and looked through the window. When the two of them looked over there, the bird catcher just now was standing on the bank of the river with his legs wide open. There was grass all around him, gleaming with a beautiful yellow and blue phosphorescence. He had a serious look on his face, spread out his hands, and stared at the sky. "There he is," said Giovanni. "What a strange position he's in. I'm sure he's about to catch some more birds. I hope some come down before the train moves." Just then a flock of snowy herons appeared from the empty, bellflower-colored sky. They looked just like snowflakes. They cried out as they came down. Then the bird catcher stood with his legs at a sharp 60-degree angle. As the birds came down, he grabbed their black legs with both hands and put them into a cloth bag as if it were all to order. The herons, like a firefly, gleamed blue for a while inside the bag, on and off, on and off. And finally, they all turned white and closed their eyes. Far more birds landed safely on the sand than were caught. But as soon as their feet touched the sand, they seemed to go flat and melt like snow. Then they spread across the sand. Their shape could still be seen in the sand for a while, going brighter and darker several times. But finally they turned into the same color as everything around them. The bird catcher put about 20 herons in his bag. Then he suddenly raised his arms. He looked like a soldier who has just been shot. Then he disappeared again. "Oh, I feel better now that's over," said a voice next to Giovanni. "There's nothing better than getting neither too many nor too few." The bird catcher was back next to them. He was already sorting out the birds he had just caught. He piled them up on top of each other. Giovanni didn't know whether what had happened was strange or not. How did you come back here so quickly from there?" he asked. "How?" replied the bird catcher. "Well, I'm back here because I wanted to come back here. By the way, where are you two from?" Giovanni wanted to reply at once. But he thought, well, where did I come from? Campanella also seemed to be trying hard to remember. His face was glowing. The bird catcher nodded as if he understood. "Ah, so you're from a place far away, are you?" (9) Giovanni's ticket. This is the end of Swan District. Look, that's the famous Alberio Observatory. Outside the window, there was a Milky Way that looked as if it was filled with fireworks. In the middle of it, there were 4 large black buildings. On top of one of them, there were 2 big transparent balls. One ball was made of blue sapphire and the other of yellow topaz. They were quietly turning. As the yellow ball went round to the back, the smaller blue ball came to the front. Then their edges would form a beautiful green double lens. The center would get bigger, and then the blue ball would move in front of the yellow one. Now there was a green center with a bright yellow ring around it. Then the balls moved off to the side again. The double lens appeared again. Then the balls separated. The sapphire ball went round to the back, and the topaz ball moved to the front. The black observatory seemed to be sleeping quietly in the middle of the silent water of the Milky Way. The birdcatcher started talking again. "That's a machine that measures the speed of water. You see, the water "I'll take a look at your ticket." Tall conductor in a red cap had suddenly appeared. He was standing very straight beside them. The bird catcher silently took out a small piece of paper from his secret pocket. The conductor looked at it and then turned towards Giovanni and Campanella. He put his hand out and moved his fingers, as if saying, "How about your tickets?" Campanella pulled out a small gray ticket at once. "Well, said Giovanni. He didn't know what to do. He put his hand into his jacket pocket, hoping there might be something there. To his surprise, he felt a large piece of paper. He quickly pulled it out. It was a piece of green paper folded in quarters about the size of a postcard. Giovanni handed it to the conductor. "I've no idea where this came from," he thought, "but maybe anything will do." And when he handed it over, the conductor stood up straight and carefully opened it and looked at it. He played with the buttons on his jackets as he read it. The lighthouse keeper looked at it with interest from below. So Giovanni thought. It must have been a certificate or something. And he felt a little hot. "Have you come here with this ticket from the third dimension?" asked the conductor. "I don't know," replied Giovanni. Feeling safe now, he looked up at the conductor and smiled. "Thank you very much, sir," said the conductor. "We will be arriving at the Southern Cross around the next 3 o'clock. He gave the paper back to Giovanni and walked off. Campanella looked at the paper as if he couldn't wait to find out what it was. Giovanni really wanted to know, too. It was covered with a black pattern. And there were around 10 strange letters on it as well. As he stared at it, Giovanni felt as if he was going to be sucked into it. Then the bird catcher glanced at it from the side and said in a panic, "Hey, this is quite something. This ticket will even take you to the real heaven. And not just that. It's a pass allowing you to go anywhere you like. Ah, I see now. With that, you can go wherever you want on this fourth dimension fantasy, the Milky Way line. You two are really something, aren't you?" "I don't really understand," replied Giovanni, his face going red. Then he folded it up and put it in his pocket. Feeling uneasy, he looked out of the window again with Campanella. He could feel the bird catcher looking over at him from time to time. He seemed to think Giovanni was someone important. "It's almost time for the eagle stop," said Campanella. He was comparing the map with the 3 little pale triangles on the far bank. Giovanni suddenly felt very sorry for the bird catcher sitting next to him. He didn't know why. He was so happy to catch those herons, he said to himself. And he wrapped them carefully in the white cloth, and he saw my ticket and looked surprised, and started saying nice things about us. He knew nothing about the bird catcher, but now he felt he wanted to give him everything he owned and all his food. I wouldn't mind standing on the shining riverbed of the Milky Way for 100 years and catching birds for him if he could become really happy. I must ask him what he really wants. Would it be all right to do that? Giovanni turned towards the bird catcher, but he was no longer there. And his white bundle had gone from the rack, too. Giovanni thought he might have gone outside again, looking up at the sky ready to catch more snowy herons. He quickly looked out of the window. but he couldn't see the birdcatcher's broad back or his pointed hat. All he could see were beautiful waves of sand and white pampas grass. "I wonder where he's gone," said Campanella. "I wonder, too. Will we ever see him again? Why didn't I talk to him a little more? I feel the same. When he was here, I felt he was a nuisance. So now I feel bad." Giovanni had never felt like that before. "And I've never said anything like that before," he thought. "It kind of smells of apples in here," said Campanella. He looked around the car in wonder. "Is that because I've just been thinking about apples?" "No, there really is a smell of apples," said Giovanni. "I can smell wild roses, too." He also looked around. But the smell seemed to be coming from outside. "But it's autumn," thought Giovanni. "There shouldn't be the scent of roses in autumn." At that moment, a boy appeared next to them. He had shiny black hair and looked about 6 years old. He wasn't wearing any shoes, and the buttons on his red jacket were not done up. He stood there shivering with a very surprised look on his face. Next to him was a tall young man wearing black clothes. He was holding the boy's hand. He looked like a tree standing firm in a strong wind. Next to the young man was a girl about 12 years old. "Oh, where are we?" "It's beautiful," said the girl. She was a pretty girl with brown eyes, wearing a cloak and standing behind the young man. She was clinging to her young man's arm and looking out the window curiously. "Ah, this must be Lancashire," replied the young man. "No, I think it's Connecticut. Oh, we've come to the sky. We're going to heaven." His face was full of joy as he spoke. "Look. That marks the sign of heaven. There's nothing to be afraid of anymore. We've been called by God." Then, suddenly lines appeared on his face. He looked very tired. He forced himself to smile and sat the little boy down next to Giovanni. He then looked at the girl and gently pointed to the seat next to Campanella. She sat down at once with her hands together in front of her. The young man sat down by the lighthouse keeper. "I want to go to where Kikuyo is," the boy said with a strange look on his face. The boy said to the young man who had just sat on the other side of the lighthouse guard. The young man said nothing. He looked very sad as he stared at the boy's wet curly hair. Suddenly the girl started crying. She put both hands over her face. "Your father and sister Kikuyo still have a lot of work to do," said the young man. "But they'll soon follow us. What's more important is to think how long your mother has been waiting for you. While she's been waiting, I'm sure she's been wondering what kind of songs her dear Tadashi is singing now. Wondering if he's playing on a snowy morning, going around the bushes holding hands with his friends. So let's hurry and see her, shall we?" "Yes. But I wish I hadn't gone on that ship." "Well, yes. But look over there. See? How about that? It's that great white river. We could always see it from the window in the summer, couldn't we? When you went to bed singing 'Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star.' Well, that's it right there. See how beautiful it is. See how much it's shining." Her crying sister also wiped her eyes with a handkerchief and looked out. "We no longer need to be sad," the young man went on softly. "We're traveling through this nice place. and we'll soon arrive at the place where God is. It will be really bright and smell good and be filled with fine people. Those who got on the boats instead of us will all have been saved. They'll go back home where their parents are waiting for them. It won't take long now. So let's be cheerful and sing some happy songs together." The young man stroked the boy's wet hair. As he spoke to the children, the color returned to his face. "And where have you come from?" asked the lighthouse keeper. "What happened to you?" He sounded as if he understood. "Well," the young man replied with a little smile, "our ship hit an iceberg and sank. The mother of these children died the year before last. Their father had to go back to his home country over 2 months ago on sudden business. We left later to follow him. I was a university student and their private teacher. But on the 12th day, today, or maybe yesterday, the ship hit an iceberg. There was some moonlight, but it was very foggy. It lifted right up out of the water and began to sink. Half of the lifeboats on one side were damaged, and, of course, the other lifeboats couldn't hold everyone. As the ship went lower in the water, I shouted out, 'Please let these young children get on the boat.' Some people made way for us and started praying for the children. But between where we were and the lifeboat, there were some other young children and their parents. However, I felt it was my duty to try to save these children. So I almost tried to push away the ones in front of us. But, at the same time, I also thought it would be real happiness for us all to go to meet God together as we were. That seemed better than trying to save them by doing something bad to other people. Then I thought I could accept the blame for my actions and save them. But I just couldn't do it. It was terrible to watch, all the children in the lifeboats, their mothers on the ship screaming and blowing them kisses, and their fathers standing up straight and trying not to show their sadness. The ship was sinking deeper and deeper. Then I made up my mind. I would hold these 2 children and wait for the ship to go down. Then we would try to float as long as we could. Somebody threw a lifebelt towards us. I don't know who it was. But we couldn't hold on to it. It went too far away from us. I didn't know what to do next. The 3 of us grabbed the railing and hung on to it. Suddenly we heard a voice shouting out the number of a hymn. At once everyone started singing it together in various languages. Just then there was a loud noise, and we were thrown into the water. Realizing we were caught in a whirlpool, I hung firmly on to these 2. The next thing I knew, we were here. I'm sure the people on the lifeboats were saved. There were some very good sailors rowing them. They were getting away quickly from the sinking ship. Some of the travelers in the car seemed to be praying. Giovanni and Campanella were close to tears. They were remembering lots of things they'd forgotten till then. Ah, thought Giovanni, maybe that ship was on the big ocean, called the Pacific. Up in the north, the water's very cold and there are many icebergs. Just think, right now some people are working their fighting against the wind and the cold. I feel really sorry for them. What can I do to make them happy? He hung his head low. He felt very miserable. Then the lighthouse keeper started speaking to him. We don't really know what happiness is. The important thing is to move along the right path. Then any difficult thing, whether you are going up or coming down a mountain, is a step towards finding real happiness? Ah, yes, said the young man. All the hard things on the way to real happiness are the will of God. The young boy and his sister had already fallen fast asleep in their seats. Their feet had been bare when they appeared on the train, but now they were wearing soft white shoes. The train went on and on beside the shining river. The view through the window on the other side of the car was just like a picture in a frame. There were hundreds, thousands of triangular signposts of various sizes. At the top of the bigger ones, there were flags with red spots on them. There were so many of them in the far distance, they looked like a pale mist. From the same place, or maybe even further away, things like signal fires rose now and then. They were in various shapes and a beautiful blue color. The scent of roses filled the air. It was brought to them by the clean, clear breeze. "How about one of these?" asked the lighthouse keeper. "It may be the first time for you to taste this kind of apple." He now had some large red and gold apples. He was holding them carefully with both hands so that he wouldn't drop them. "Oh, they look great," said the young man, sounding surprised. "Where did they come from? Can you grow apples like that around here?" He was staring at them with his head to one side. "Well, yes. Please try one." The young man took an apple. Then the lighthouse keeper looked at Giovanni and Campanella. "Now, you young lads, how about you? Please take one." Giovanni said nothing. He didn't like being called a young lad. But Campanella said, "Thank you." The young man took 2 more apples and handed them over to the 2 boys. Giovanni stood up and thanked him. The lighthouse keeper had his hands free at last. He gently put an apple on the laps of the sleeping brother and sister. "Thank you so much," said the young man, staring down at his apple. "Where are such lovely apples grown?" "Well, of course, there is some farming in this area. But mostly good apples are supposed to grow by themselves, you know. So farming is not such hard work. In most cases, if you sow the seeds of whatever you want, they'll grow by themselves. Take rice, for example. It doesn't have husks like the rice grown around the Pacific. The grains are 10 times bigger and they taste very good. And the apples and sweets don't produce any waste. They produce a little scent that comes out through your skin. It's different for each person. But there's no farming in the area you're heading to." Suddenly, the little boy opened his eyes wide. "Oh," he said, "I was dreaming about Mother. She was sitting in a nice place with lots of books. She looked at me and put out her hands. And she smiled and smiled and smiled. When I said, 'Mommy, shall I go and pick some apples for you?' I woke up." "Ah, we're still in the same train, aren't we?" "You have an apple there," said the young man. It was a present from this man. "Thank you, sir," said the boy. "Oh, Keiru's still asleep. I'll wake her up. Keiru, look, we have some apples. Wake up." Keiru woke up smiling. She put both hands over her eyes because of the bright light. Then she looked at her apple. Her brother had already started eating his, just as if he were eating a pie. He had carefully peeled it. As the peel came off, it glowed gray. But it disappeared before it reached the floor. Giovanni and Campanella carefully put their apples into their pockets. They could now see a big wood on the other side of the river. The branches were heavy with fruit. It was round and shining red. A very tall triangular signpost stood in the middle of the wood. A beautiful sound was coming from the wood on the breeze. It seemed to melt into your mind. The young man's body shook. The others listened to the music without speaking. It sounded as if a bright carpet of yellow and light green had been spread all around. "Oh, look!" cried the girl. "Crows." "They're not crows, they're magpies," replied Campanella as though he was telling her off. Giovanni couldn't help laughing. The girl's face went red. In the pale light from the river, they could see many blackbirds quietly perched in a row. "Ah, yes, they're magpies," said the young man. "You can tell by the feathers sticking out at the back of their heads." The train was now in line with the tall signpost in the wood. Just then, they heard the sound of singing coming from the back of the train. It sounded as if many people were singing a hymn in chorus. The young man suddenly went pale and stood up. He looked as if he was going to go towards the sound. But he changed his mind and sat down again. Kaoru held her handkerchief to her face. Even Giovanni felt a kind of tickle in his nose. More and more people seemed to be joining in. The sound of the hymn got clearer and stronger. Suddenly, Giovanni and Campanella started singing as well. Then the beautiful sound from the wood faded away. All that could now be heard were the wind and the train. "Ah, there's a lyrebird," cried the little boy suddenly. "Oh yes, there are lots of them," replied the girl. The wood now looked as small as a green button. Giovanni could see the reflection of a pale shining light as the lyrebirds spread and closed their tails above it. "That's right. I even heard them calling," Campanella said to Kaoru. "Yes," she replied, "they sounded like harps playing, didn't they? I'm sure there were about 30 of them." Giovanni suddenly felt sad again. He wanted to say, "Campanella, shall we get off here and have some fun?" The river had now divided into two. On the dark island in the middle, there was a very tall tower. A man wearing a red hat was standing on top of it looking up at the sky. He was holding red and blue flags and sending signals with them. For a while, he kept waving the red flag. Then suddenly, he lowered it and held it behind his back. Then he raised the blue flag much higher up and waved it hard. He looked like the conductor of an orchestra. Then there was a sound like heavy rain falling. A great cloud of black things shot across the river. Giovanni leaned a long way out of the window to see better. The empty sky was a beautiful blue. Flock after flock of small birds were flying over. Each one must have contained several thousand birds. They were all crying out as they flew. "The birds are flying away," Giovanni called from outside the window. "What?" Campanella also looked up at the sky. Just then, the man on the tower suddenly raised the red flag and shook it. Suddenly the flocks of birds stopped coming. At the same time, a strange wet kind of sound came from downstream. Then everything went silent for a while. suddenly the signal man began waving the blue flag again. Migratory birds, they heard him shout. Now's the time to pass. Migratory birds, now's the time to pass. At once, a flock of tens of thousands of birds flew straight across the sky. The girl put her head out of the window, between Giovanni and Campanella. Her beautiful cheeks gleamed as she looked up at the sky. "Oh, what a lot of birds there are," she said. "And how beautiful the sky is." She spoke to Giovanni, but he was thinking how stuck up she was. He didn't like her at all. He kept his mouth closed as he looked up at the sky. The girl sighed and went back to her seat without saying anything. Campanella pulled his head in from the window. He was feeling sorry for her. He started looking at the map. "Is that man giving instructions to the birds?" the girl asked him in a soft voice. "Yes, perhaps he can see a signal flare that has been sent up somewhere," Campanella answered. He didn't sound too sure. The car went silent. Giovanni wanted to pull his head in from the window, too. But he didn't want to show his face in that bright place. So he stayed where he was and started whistling. "I wonder why I'm so sad," he thought. "I think I should be nicer to other people. Oh, there's a small blue fire burning on the other side of the river. It looks so calm and so cold. Perhaps I could learn how to calm down by staring at it." His head was burning. He pressed both hands against it and kept staring at the fire. "Ah, isn't there anybody who will stay with me forever and ever?" Even Campanella seems to enjoy talking to a girl like that. "I feel so sad." His eyes filled with tears again. The Milky Way now looked like something white far, far away. The train started moving away from the river. It was running along the top of a cliff. There was a black cliff on the other side of the river, too. It was getting higher and higher as the train moved downstream. Giovanni suddenly saw a big corn tree. Under the curly leaves, there were beautiful big green husks. They already had red hairs, and he could see some grains like pearls. Then more and more trees appeared. They stood in a row between the cliff and the tracks. Giovanni pulled his head in from the window. He looked across at the window on the other side of the car. As far as he could see, there were big corn trees under a beautiful sky. They were all swaying in the breeze. The drops of dew at the end of the lovely curly leaves were like red and green flames, or diamonds full of sunlight. "That's corn, isn't it?" Campanella asked. "I think so," Giovanni replied. He was still feeling the same, so he just kept staring out at the fields. Just then the train began to get quieter. It passed some signals and point lights and then stopped at a small station. The pale station clock showed exactly 2 o'clock. Tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock. The breeze wasn't blowing anymore. The only sound came from the clock. Then, between each tick-tock, a very, very faint melody could be heard. It was coming from far, far away across the fields. The girl looked at the others. "It's a symphony. It's the New World Symphony," she said softly, as if talking to herself. Everyone else in the car, including the tall young man in black clothes, was deep in thought. Why can't I be happier in a nice kind of quiet place like this, thought Giovanni. Why do I feel so alone? And Campanella isn't being nice to me. He's here on the train with me, but he's only talking to that girl. I'm really sad. He was still staring out of the window, his face in his hands. Then the whistle blew. It was like the sound of cut glass. The train quietly started moving again. Campanella began whistling the Star Traveler's song. Yes, yes, this area is bad for growing things, said a voice behind them. It sounded like an old man. He was talking as if he had just woken up. Take corn, for example. You have to dig a hole about 60 centimeters deep for the seeds. If you don't do that, it won't grow. I see, said another voice. So it must be a long way down to the river. Yes, indeed. Between 600 and 1,800 meters. It's a very deep gorge. Thought Giovanni suddenly, perhaps this is Colorado. Campanella was still sitting alone, whistling in a lonely kind of way. The girl was looking in the same direction as Giovanni. Suddenly the cornfields disappeared and a great black plain spread out before them. The New World Symphony was coming out much more clearly from somewhere over the horizon. A red Indian appeared with white feathers on his head. On his arms and chest, he had many stone ornaments. He was running after the train as fast as his legs would carry him and fitting an arrow to his small bow. Oh, there's a red Indian. Look. It's a red Indian. The young man in black woke up. Giovanni and Campanella both stood up. He's running towards us. He's following us. No, he's not running after the train, said the young man. He's either hunting or dancing. He was standing with his hands in his pockets. He looked as if he had forgotten where he was. The red Indian did look as though he might be dancing. If he was really running, his steps would have been stronger. Suddenly he stopped. The white feathers fell forward. He shot an arrow straight up and a crane fell from the sky. The red Indian ran forward with his arms held out and caught it. He stood there smiling happily with the bird in his arms and looked towards the train. But his shadow soon became smaller and faded away. 2 telegraph poles gleamed as they went by. Then there was nothing but corn again. Giovanni looked out of the window on his side of the car. The train was running on top of the high cliff. The wide river was shining as usual down at the bottom of the deep gorge. We'll be going down soon, said a voice. It was the old man again. It's not so easy. The train has to go right down to the river all at once. It's so steep, no trains ever come up the other way. See, we're getting faster and faster. Down, down, down. Down went the train. Every time it was right on the edge of the cliff, the river could be seen shining far down below. Giovanni was beginning to feel brighter. Oh, cried Giovanni when the train passed a lonely-looking child standing in front of a small house. Down, 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 down. All the travelers in the car were leaning back and holding firmly onto their seats. Giovanni and Campanella suddenly smiled together. Then they were back next to the Milky Way. It was flowing on strongly right beside the train. It shone from time to time. Pink flowers were blooming everywhere. The train was now running along slowly as though it had finally calmed down. On both sides of the river, they could see flags with a design of a star and a pickaxe. At last Giovanni spoke again. "What are those flags?" I have no idea. The map doesn't show them." "There's an iron boat there, too." "Yes." "Maybe they're building a bridge," said the girl. "Yes. Look, they're engineers' flags. I think they're practicing building bridges. But I can't see any soldiers." Just then, the water of the Milky Way suddenly gleamed brightly. There was a loud bang and the water shot high into the air. "They're blasting!" cried Campanella, jumping for joy. "They're blasting!" The water disappeared. Many large salmon and trout had been thrown up into the air. They watched them fall back to the water. Giovanni now felt so good, he wanted to jump up and down. "It's the Sky Engineering Battalion," he cried. "Wow, those fish were thrown up like this. I've never been on such a fun journey before. I feel so good. I think those trout must be this big if you saw them close," said Campanella. "There are so many fish in the river." "I wonder if there are any small fish as well," the girl said, joining in. "I'm sure there are," said Giovanni with a big smile. "There are big ones, so there should be small ones, too. But we were too far away to see them." He was now in a good mood again. "Oh, I think those are the Gemini shrines," the boy shouted suddenly. He was pointing out of the window. They could see two shrines on top of a low hill on the right. They looked as if they were made from small crystals. "What are the Gemini shrines?" "Oh, I've heard about them many times from our mother. I'm sure those are them. She said they were made of crystal and were standing side by side." "Please tell us about them." "Who were the Gemini?" "I know that, of course," said the brother. "They were twin stars. They went out into the fields to play. They had an argument with a crow. Isn't that right?" "No, it's not," replied his sister. "My mother told me that on the bank of the Milky Way. A comet came along going gee-gee-foo, gee-gee-foo." "No, that's a different story." "They've gone to sea, of course." "No, they haven't. They've already come back from the sea." "That's right. I know that. Let me tell you the story." Suddenly, the other side of the river went red. The trees and everything else turned into silhouettes. There was a big red fire in the field on the opposite side. It looked as though it would burn the cold blue heavens. Clouds of black smoke reached high up into the sky. "What kind of fire is that?" asked Giovanni. "What would you burn to produce flames so shining red?" "It's the scorpion flame," Campanella replied. He was looking at the map again. "Oh, I know all about that," said the girl. "What is it?" asked Giovanni. "Well, a scorpion was burned and died, and the fire is still burning today. I heard that story from our father many times." "A scorpion's an insect, right?" "Yes, it is an insect. But it's a good insect." "A scorpion's not a good insect," said her brother. "I saw one at the museum. They have a kind of hook on their tail and you die if they sting you. Our teacher told us. That's right. But it's still a good insect. Our father told us the story. Once upon a time, there was a scorpion that killed small insects to live. One day, it was found by a weasel. The weasel wanted to eat it. The scorpion tried very hard to escape. But just as the weasel was going to catch the scorpion, a well appeared right in front of it. The scorpion fell to the bottom. It couldn't get out again and began to drown. The scorpion started praying, saying, I don't know how many lives I have killed up to now. But when the weasel was going to kill me, I tried to escape from it so hard. Now I'm in here dying after all. Why didn't I offer my body to the weasel without saying anything? Then the weasel could have lived one more day. God, please look into my heart. Next time, don't throw away my life like this. Please use my body so that other people can be happy. Then the scorpion saw that its body had become a beautiful red flame to light the darkness of the night. Our father said that the flame is still burning. And it must be that fire over there. I think you're right, said Giovanni. Look. The signposts around it are in the shape of a scorpion. He could see 3 triangular signposts beyond the big fire. They were standing in line, just like the front legs of a scorpion. And 5 triangular signposts on this side looked like a scorpion's tail and sting. The beautiful red scorpion flame was burning very bright without any sound. It disappeared from view behind the train. Now they could hear a very cheerful medley of various types of music. They could also hear people talking and whistling. And there was a strong scent of grasses and flowers. It seemed they would soon arrive at a town or some kind of festival. Centaurus, send the dew down on us, shouted the young boy suddenly. He had been asleep next to Giovanni. Now he was looking out of the window on the other side. There was a dark green tree standing there just like a Christmas tree. It was covered in little lights, like thousands of fireflies. Oh, right. It's the night of the Centaur Festival. Ah, so this must be Centaur Village, Campanella said at once. Can we play ball toss there? Said the boy boastfully. I'll never miss the targets. We'll soon be at the Southern Cross, said the young man to the children. Please get ready to get off. But I want to stay on this train, the boy replied. The girl stood up, but it looked as if she didn't want to leave Giovanni and Campanella. But we have to get off here, the young man said. He looked down at the boy without smiling. I don't want to get off? I want to ride on this train some more and then get off. Giovanni could no longer stay silent. You can stay here with us. We have a ticket which allows us to go anywhere. But we must get off here, the girl said sadly. Because this is the place that leads to heaven. You don't have to go to heaven. Our teacher told us that we have to create a better place than heaven here and now. But our mother is there, and God tells us what to do. I think a God like that is a fake. No, your God is a fake. No, he isn't. And what kind of God is your God? The young man asked with a smile. Well, I don't know very well, replied Giovanni. But he's not like that. He's the only one real God. Of course there's only one real God. No, I mean he's the only really real God. That's what I'm saying, said the young man. And I pray that we will all soon be meeting the real God. Then he put his hands together. The girl did the same. They all looked sorry to be leaving, and their faces were rather pale. Giovanni nearly started crying. So, are you both ready? Asked the young man. We'll soon be there. Then something happened. A cross appeared a long way downstream. It was standing in the middle of the Milky Way River like a tree. It was covered in bright lights of blue and orange and many other colors. A pale cloud hung over it like a halo. Inside the car, it suddenly became very noisy. Many travelers stood up and started praying, just as they had at the Northern Cross. The air was filled with joyful voices, like the cries of children when they jump on a melon, and also deep sighs. The train moved closer until the cross was right in front of the windows. The pale cloud was moving round very slowly. Hallelujah! Hallelujah! A chorus of happy voices rose from the train. Then, somewhere from the distance in the cold sky, came the clear, pure sound of a trumpet. The train slowed down as it passed many signals. At last, it came to a stop right across the river from the cross. Now we must get off, said the young man. He started walking slowly towards the end of the car, holding the boy's hand. The girl stopped and turned back to look at Giovanni and Campanella. Well, goodbye, then. Goodbye, said Giovanni, trying not to cry. The girl's eyes were open very wide. They showed the pain of parting. Then she turned and left without speaking. The train was now more than half empty. It suddenly seemed very bare and lonely. The wind blew right through it. Giovanni and Campanella looked out of the window. All the travelers who had got off the train were now kneeling on the bank of the Milky Way in front of the cross. A godlike person in white clothes was walking towards them. He crossed over the water with his hands stretched out. But then the glass whistle blew and the train started moving. A silver mist drifted from downstream and the scene disappeared from sight. All the boys could see now were walnut trees with shining leaves. The cute faces of electric squirrels with gold halos appeared from the mist and then disappeared again. Then the mist began to clear. Now Giovanni and Campanella could see a wide road lined with small electric lights. It ran right beside the tracks for a while. The tiny bean-colored lights suddenly went off as the boys passed, as though greeting them. But as soon as they had gone by, they came on again. They turned to look back towards the cross. It now looked small enough to hang around your neck. It was difficult to make out the white beach where the girl, the young man, and the others had been kneeling. They couldn't tell whether they were still there or had already gone along the unknown road to heaven. Ah! Giovanni sighed deeply. Campanella, it's now just the two of us again. Let's go on together, wherever, forever and ever. You remember that scorpion? Well, I wouldn't mind my body being burned 100 times if it made everyone happy. I wouldn't mind either, said Campanella. His eyes were filled with beautiful tears. But what is real happiness? Giovanni asked. I don't know. Anyway, we must do our best to stay happy, Giovanni said. He breathed deeply as if to fill his heart with new energy. "Oh, look! The coal sacks. It must be a black hole." Campanella was pointing out of the window. Giovanni looked and was surprised to see a big dark hole in the middle of the Milky Way. He rubbed his eyes and looked again, to try and find out how deep it was and what was inside it. But he couldn't see anything. It just made his eyes hurt. "I wouldn't be frightened now," he said, "even if I went into such a big dark hole. I would be happy to go and look if it was for everybody's happiness. We'll go on together, Campanella, wherever, forever and ever." "I'm sure we will," said Campanella. "Oh, look at that beautiful place," he suddenly shouted. He was pointing into the distance. "Everyone's gathered there. I'm sure that's the real heaven. Oh, yes, that's my mother over there." Giovanni looked, but he couldn't see anything clearly. Everything was just white. It was nothing like the view Campanella had seen. He felt very sad again as he stared out of the window. Suddenly, he saw two telegraph poles standing side by side on the riverbank. It looked as though their red cross arms were linked together. "Campanella, we'll go on together, right?" he said, turning back from the window. But Campanella wasn't there. There was only the shining seat where he had been sitting. Giovanni jumped up. He leaned a long way out of the window so that nobody could hear him. He felt a sudden pain in his chest hard and screamed out. Then he started crying. Everything around him had suddenly gone very dark. Giovanni opened his eyes. He felt so tired. His heart seemed to burning in a strange way. And there were tears running down his cheeks. Giovanni jumped up like a spring. Down below him were all the lights of the town just like before. But they looked somehow stronger. He had just been walking along the Milky Way in his dream. And there it was now, hanging above the black horizon to the south. It looked less clearly white than before. The red scorpion star was twinkling beautifully to the right of it. The position of everything in the sky looked almost the same. Giovanni ran down the hill as fast as his legs would carry him. His head was full of the picture of his mother waiting for him to come home for dinner. He raced on through the black pine woods, faster and faster, along the white farm fence, and through the same gate as before to the front of the dark farm. There was a cart there that he hadn't seen earlier. Someone must have come back. "Good evening," Giovanni shouted. "Yes?" A man wearing big white trousers came out at once. "What can I do for you?" "Well, we didn't get our milk today." "Oh, sorry about that," replied the man. He went inside and came back with a bottle of milk. He handed it to Giovanni. "I'm really sorry about that. You see, I forgot to close the calf's pen this afternoon and it got out and drank about half of its mother's milk." He smiled. "I see," said Giovanni. "Well, thank you very much for the milk." "I'm really sorry." "Oh, that's all right." Giovanni left the farm with both hands around the bottle of warm milk. He walked along the track through the trees. Then he came to the main street. He walked for a while and came to the crossroads. To the right, he could see the tower of the big bridge over the river. It was dark against the night sky. That was where Campanella and his friends had gone to float their lanterns. There were groups of women standing at each corner of the crossroads and in front of all the shops. They were all talking about something in a low voice and looking towards the bridge. There were lots of different types of lights on the bridge. Giovanni's heart suddenly felt cold. "What's happened?" he cried out to some people nearby. "A child fell into the river," someone replied. The people all turned to look at him. Giovanni ran onto the bridge. He had no idea what he was doing. It was crowded with people. He couldn't see the river at all. He saw a policeman in a white coat. He went straight to the end of the bridge and jumped down on to the wide, dry part of the riverbed. There were many lights busily moving up and down along the edge of the water. He could also see 7 or 8 lights moving along the dark bank on the other side. Between them, the gray river flowed quietly past. It was no longer lit by the lights of cucumber lanterns. Giovanni could see the clear silhouettes of a group of people downstream on a sandbank. He raced towards them. He suddenly saw Marceau, who had been with Campanella earlier. Marceau ran up to him. "Giovanni," he shouted. "Campanella went in the river." "Why? When?" "They were in the boat." Zanelli was trying to push a lantern towards where the water was faster. But the boat rocked and he fell in. Campanella jumped into the water as well. He pushed Zanelli back towards the boat. Cato grabbed him. "But we can't find Campanella." "Everyone's looking for him, right?" "Yes." Everyone came quickly. Campanella's dad came, too. "But we can't find him. Zanelli's been taken home." Giovanni went over to the area where everyone was standing. Campanella's father was there with pale, sharp chin. He was wearing a black coat. He was standing very straight and looking at the watch he was holding in his right hand. All around him were students and people from the town. They were all staring at the river. Nobody spoke. Giovanni's legs were shaking. He could see many fishing lamps busily coming and going. They lit up the ripples on the black river. Downstream, stretching across the whole width of the river, there was a reflection of the Milky Way. The river looked like part of the sky. Giovanni felt that the only place they could find Campanella was at the far edge of the Milky Way. But other people seemed to think Campanella would suddenly appear from the water, saying, "Oh, I had to swim a lot." Or was standing on some sandbank, which nobody knew about, waiting for someone to come. Campanella's father suddenly spoke in a sharp voice, "There's no hope anymore. It's already been 45 minutes." Giovanni ran up to the doctor. He wanted to say that he knew where Campanella had gone because they'd been walking together. But no words came out. The doctor must have thought Giovanni wanted to greet him or something. He looked at Giovanni for a few moments and then said, "You're Giovanni, aren't you? Thank you very much for helping us tonight." Giovanni could say nothing. He just bowed. "Has your father come back yet?" the doctor asked. He was still holding his watch firmly. "No," replied Giovanni, shaking his head. I wonder why not?" He sent me a letter a couple of days ago saying he was doing well. He should have been back by today. Perhaps the ship was late. Giovanni, please visit my place with the other boys tomorrow after school, will you? As he spoke, the doctor was staring downstream towards the reflection of the Milky Way. Giovanni's heart was so full of so many things, he still couldn't say anything. He left the doctor. Now he wanted to take the milk quickly to his mother and let her know that his father was coming home. He ran back across the riverbed towards the town as fast as his legs would carry him.